Um, I grew up in South Jersey, little beach town in Jersey, with a large family, 8 kids. And my dad had a dinner theater when I was growing up, so I grew up on the stage at a very young age. And I was doing great in the first, out of the gate, I guess. And right around 12 or 13, I was introduced to alcohol, and I went from here to almost overnight into a whole nother, I became a whole nother person, actually. It took me about a year to completely destroy everything that I had built and worked for and whatever at that young age, and was basically going into high school and was ready to quit, and was over parents and when to be home, and alcohol was I can't tell you the feeling I got when I drank, but it was the answer. And so I decided I couldn't handle it anymore. I had to run away. And so at that time, it was 1982. So I think it was Fort Lauderdale was the big thing. And I was on the East Coast, and it was kind of cold. And so I was like at a keg party, and I grabbed my closest buddy and I said, "Let's go. We're going to Fort Lauderdale, and I'm starting over. I'm getting out of this place." And so, we stole my dad's Cadillac and drove down to Fort Lauderdale at almost 14. I could barely see over the steering wheel, and I was drunk as we left. And I remember coming to in Washington, D.C. The sun's coming up, and I'm driving this Cadillac Fleetwood, and my buddy's in the car, and I got like 7 suitcases, all my life's belongings, and I'm like, oh my God, what did I just do? And I had this overwhelming sense of sadness, of just like, I just left my whole life. And I knew I couldn't turn back. And so I had to keep going. And I just was like, well, I did it, and this is it. I gotta move on. So I did, and we made it. We went down to Fort Lauderdale. We made it down there. And that didn't last long. We bumped into somebody, and we shacked up for a couple days. And long story short, our parents had tickets for us waiting, and we had to go back home. And they were just like, "Okay, we're going to pretend like nothing happened. And we're just going to, move on." And just, we don't know they didn't know what to do. They were like, So, so at that point, I lasted another couple months, and I said, "You know what, I got to go." And I went and did the same thing. And I went back to Fort Lauderdale, and it was getting ugly. And at that point, I wandered. I ended up coming back to New Jersey, and long story short, I went to treatment. A judge ordered me to the treatment center, to this place called White Deer in the mountains in Pennsylvania. And it was, I went in kicking and screaming. I was like, "Oh, I'm not an addict. I'm not an alcoholic, blah, 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 blah." And I was, a teenager, and I was, I had earrings and shaved. I was a mess. And I had a breakthrough when I was in treatment. And I let go. I said, "You know what? All right. I admit I got a problem." and I let go. And at that point, everything turned around. And I had 5 or 6 years of sobriety after that. We ended up moving down to Florida, actually, the family. And I went into NA and AA, and I had a really good recovery, actually, at a very young age, and was in and out of therapy, and I was loving it and enjoying it, because I knew that if I didn't do that, that my answer was to completely rebel and be a maniac. So I kind of went the other way and tried a different route, and it was working. And the only thing is that a buddy of mine in NA was going to California, so we threw him a going away party, and I ended up meeting a stripper. This is when I was junior in high school down in Florida, and I ended up moving in with her actually when we came back from LA, and my parents ended up moving back to New Jersey. I stayed in Florida and said, "Don't worry, I'll finish high school down here." And I didn't go back to school at that point, except when it was senior year, when everybody else was graduating. Again, I had this flash in front of my eyes, like, "Oh my God, what am I doing?" And so I took a high school equivalency test and went into junior college, and then I decided, well, what am I going to do with my life? So I like acting, and I've been on the stage since I was 10. My dad had a dinner theater, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to study acting. I know that's not the best thing to study at school, but I have to do something that I like. So I got a scholarship and went into this great college in Winter Park, Florida, and got my BA in theater arts. But that voice was right there. That monkey was on my back the whole time. And it was senior year and a senior week and Florida, and I was 5 years sober and just thirsty. And oh God, it took me a week. The idea of, I just remember thinking about it, and I just like savored it for every day. I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it today. No, I'm going to wait. And man, when I took that drink, it's my nemesis. It's what I have to battle. And it was so powerful. And it was, at that point I knew that it wasn't going anywhere. So I just let it on, and I got into a conservatory in New York City for acting. And so I graduated college, went to New York, and it's a 2-year program. And in that first year, it was great. I was on Broadway. I was studying, acting with some of the best teachers in New York, and Al Pacino was on the board of directors, and it was just great school, great experience. But my head was so far up my ass, I didn't even realize, here I am on Broadway going to, since I was a kid, that's all I wanted to do. And I didn't even realize what I had. And, you have to be asked back to the second year. And I remember I went to the meeting with the president of the school, and he said, "Billy, the teachers love you. They say they want you to come back, but they're leaving it up to you, and they want you to make the decision carefully and make sure that you come back. If you come back, that you come back 100%, and that you would know what that meant." And I know they know, they could see me struggling. It was a very intimate year because they were in my business. We were studying characters and, going through it. It was intense. So they could see me struggling with alcohol and drugs. And they didn't want me they wanted me to respect my art a little bit more, my craft. And I understood what they were talking about, because it's not fair to do that. And so I said, let me think about it for a couple weeks. And I spent the next 2 weeks in a bar, I'm 21 years old and 22. And, and I went back to the president of the school. I said, I think I have some exploring to do. I have to go, discover some things and figure some things out. And in the back of my head, I'm saying, that's all right. I'll come back to my dream. It's no big deal. And it really didn't set in. It didn't sink into what I had done. It took about a year or two, and then I realized what the power of drugs and alcohol at that point had compounded, and more and more and more. And I realized how far gone I was and what I had done. And it's just like there's moments in life that are indelible, where you just kind of, where you get glimpses of them as you go. And it's like, and that's just one of those moments where it's just like, God, it was just really a sad moment. Like, it's just, I couldn't touch it. It was gone. It was gone. And I knew that. And, and so I I then I put on my seatbelt, and I had spent the next 10, 12 years until I was like 33, drowning that guilt and beating myself up and partying as hard as I was a binge drinker and partier. So I would just go until I couldn't stop, and then I would stop, and then just recover until I could walk again, get my sense about me, and then go back and dive into it again. And it's just like I just always had somebody yelling at me like, Billy, Billy, Billy. It was always a girlfriend or a boss or somebody trying to get me to. I was late. It was a mess, and I was tired. And at 33, I was back in Florida again, and I was gonna kill myself. I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I hit another bottom basically, and I had gotten sober with a friend of mine. She had remained sober the whole time, and she was out in California. And so I called her, and she said, "Come on out to California." And I came out with like $20 and a lot of willingness, and came out to this group called the Pacific Group, and it was a really strong AA group. And man, I grabbed it quick, and I got a job pretty much like within the next week. I moved in with somebody that needed a roommate within the next week, and then I got a car a couple months later, and I was working within 6 months, life was completely different. I was working out. I was down in Venice Beach, working out during this, in the sunrise. I got the Pacific Ocean, and it was just like, those moments, just working out. And it's just like, God, where was I? I was going to kill myself 6 months ago. And here I am. Life is completely, better. And it's turned, and it was good. And it was, but man, the addiction, the alcoholic, the monkey, it never leaves, and it never left. And it was, I was approaching my second year. I was going to get my 2-year medallion, and I kind of drifted away from the group a little bit. Wasn't going to as many meetings, and my ex-girlfriend from Florida moved out here, which was a bad idea, and that was the start of falling back into some patterns, and I was like, oh, I can lean on that a little bit, and I prepared myself for a relapse. And I went out one weekend and completely destroyed everything that I worked for this 2 years here, and it killed me. I walked around like a zombie for a week in Hollywood, like, oh my God, what did I just do? And I had no idea what I was going to do, and I knew that I wanted to die, but I didn't have the balls to kill myself. And deep down, I didn't really want to die. Because life's been good at sometimes, and I wanted it back. I wanted to be back on top. I wasn't willing to get sober and do the right things to do it, I guess. The right thing, I guess, at that point would have been to have picked, just dusted off and got right back in and jumped right back in. But I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. So it is what it is. I knew that I couldn't do it. I didn't have the strength, so I was a zombie. And then I bumped into this crystal meth. And I hate to say it, but it was a godsend. And I believed it was at the time. And I kind of, I don't know how, it saved my life. It really did. I realized that it cured my depression immediately. I didn't want to kill myself anymore all of a sudden. And I was a mess when I drank, I was horrible. I mean, I was the guy you didn't want to be around that came in. You were like, it was like, oh God, this guy, here he is, quick, hide. And with meth, it was different. I figured out how to behave correctly, and made me actually responsible. It was strange. The formula that I had been looking for all this time was right there, and I embraced it, and of course here I am, shooting meth, and I'm praying as I'm shooting, with gratitude. It just didn't make sense. It was bittersweet. I was using it to substitute, and it worked. And I think the best thing to have done would have been to, at maybe, whenever, would to have been left that alone, and then when I got strong enough to get sober or whatever, maybe not sober, but maybe move on to the next phase. But I didn't, and I let it, and I just kind of, man, here I am. It's 2000. That was 2005. It's 2022. Oh my God! So it's been over 20 years that I've been, shooting dope, and I couldn't support myself ever when I was, drinking and doing drugs. I always leaned on, a girlfriend or something like that. But when I got on meth, I completely changed and was, it has a strange sexual connotation to it, and it kind of opened me up a little bit. And I was already very comfortable around guys. I grew up in the theater, so I was, all my friends were always gay, and it was just like, I felt more, in the theater, it's not a gay thing. It's just whatever. So I realized that there was a lot of money to be made, especially in LA, and I was right near West Hollywood, and it was just like Craigslist was just starting up. It was actually a really interesting time, and there was a brief period before the psychos got on Craigslist, and it was actually really, really cool site to get onto and meet people. It only lasted. It was a brief window, and so I was dealing drugs, and I was doing erotic massages. Most of my clients were men. Some of them were couples, and then there was an occasional female. And I got a call one day from this female, and she gave me her address. It was up in Laurel Canyon, and I was like, oh wow! I was so hungry for a female. I was like, I can't wait. So I went. I met this girl, and she was beautiful, and I moved in 2 weeks later, and she was not the right girl to fall in love with. I don't know what I was falling in love. I think it was her situation that I fell in love with. I don't know, but we had a very, very intense relationship for about 9 months, but it was ugly. It was really ugly. And I explored and, sides to myself and parts of sex, and it was really crazy. She introduced me to something called rough sex, and and believe it or not, I was actually, very tame up until that point. And so the type of sex we were having was really, really rough. She wanted to be knocked out, basically, and have to come to and kind of, figure out who's fucking her and whatever. And that was her rush. She was a beautiful blonde girl who got her way. And so she got off on, she wanted to be, slapped and put in her place, and that got, and I was like, so I found a happy medium in there. I did it to where, it wasn't too much, but to where I felt comfortable, and we had, we were shooting dope, having rough sex, and, basically what happened is it ended, with me in jail, and with 4 charges on me, 2 counts of corporal injury, false imprisonment, and sodomy by force. And man, that's another indelible moment in the cop car going, oh my God, what is happening? And I remember saying to the officer, I'm like, how long is it? What's going? They didn't even, I mean, if I'd have known what was coming up, I don't think I would have been able to handle it, but it was just moment by moment at some point. So here I am going into the LA County Jail with a sex charge, and it's not the place you want to be with a sex charge. They by law have to protect pedophiles, but if you have a regular sex charge, they don't have to. If they're not obligated to protect you, but you're as good as done anyway. So it's like, so I was beat up immediately when I got in, and was like, holy shit! I'm still trying to get her out of my system and trying to come to with what just happened, and I'm like, I can't deal with it. So I was like, I was trying to have a nervous breakdown. I couldn't do it, but I was like, so what do I do? So I figured out how to get into solitary confinement for 30 days. And for a couple of weeks, I just cleansed myself and got my head right and got her out of my head, and just realized that I needed to get back out in the general population because time moved a lot faster, and it was crawling in that cell. So I was not going to have it. So I got back out in general population. I just lied. I just, people asked me what I was in here for. I said domestic charge, and that was it. And because it's not like prison where they know your business too much because it's so transient. So you just lie, and everybody else is lying in there anyway. They're all lying. So it's like, I was fine, but I spent 10 months in there because first of all they said, well, okay, you can go to prison for 3.5 years. And I was like, 3.5 years to go to prison? I'm not going to prison. There's no, I'm not guilty, first of all, of the charges that you have on me. I said, I'll admit I'm guilty of something, but not of these charges. And so here's, if I had some money and I had an attorney, here's where our system is fucked up. If I had an attorney, I could have very easily have gotten that reduced to a correct charge, which I gladly would have, but what happened is I ended up getting a state-appointed attorney. The district attorney that was fighting my case was up for a judgeship in 3 months. So, it was all bad. My ex-girlfriend, her dad is a billionaire and a Republican. So, they put $1 million bail on me. They had 4 charges. If I was found guilty of these 4 charges, I was going away for like 20 years, and which was a death sentence. And I was like, man. So I said, well, then, you know what? We'll go to trial because there's just no way you're going to be able to convince 12 people that's what I did. There's just no way. And so we, postpone, and finally, we get to trial, and it was brutal, man. I was in trial for like a 2.5 week trial, and I had to let go. At that point, really, I found God again, and it's not like it was a jailhouse thing because I've had God in my life always, since I was a kid. It's just as I've grown up, it's kind of evolved into my own thing. I've personalized it a little bit more, but this was definitely another moment where I let go and truly, turned it over because I really had no choice at that point, and so, long story short, the trial ended in a hung jury on all 4 charges, which was, I didn't know what it was. I was like, what is it? A hung jury? What is it? I didn't, it was like, I'm going through all this. Our system is really complicated when you're going through it, if you've never been through it. And I'm like, okay, so a hung jury, I know that that's actually a good thing because it means that they didn't do what they set out to do, which was to put me away. But I didn't win because and they refiled the case all over again. And I was like, oh my God. So I was completely wiped out. But so I had to go back 2 weeks later. At that point, I was getting advice from this old a black man he'd been through the system, and he was telling me what to do and what to look for. And he said, you know what? He said, don't worry, they're going to have a better offer for you now. He goes, they have to. They just spent all that money and it didn't work. So now they have to give you a better deal. It's just part of the game. And they did. They had a great deal, kind of. The one thing I wanted was to get out of jail. That's all I wanted. I could handle anything else that they were giving me. I just needed to get out of jail because my life was being threatened and I was dying in there. And so that was one of the options. They said get out of jail, but also you sign a plea agreement that says you're guilty, and then 5 years formal probation, a year of sex offender classes, and then register as a sex offender for the rest of your life. And my attorney's going, oh, you're not signing that. You're not signing that. And I said, the hell I'm not. I'm not going to trial with you again either, because he was working with the DA and giving her, it was a horrible situation. So I signed a plea agreement. I got out of jail. And here I am. It's 12 years. It's been about 12 years since that happened, since I got out. And man, there's time again. Boom. And it's just that my drug addiction took on new, I did the 5 years formal probation almost perfectly. There was a small little hiccup, but thank God something was on my side. And then about 3 years ago, my mother died, and so I was doing fine with the crystal meth, but the mom dying was a little much for me, and so I brought on heroin to just numb out and to not feel. And you know what? It worked. It really worked. As much as it could, until, so here I am now, and I'm at a point where I've done everything that I shouldn't have done, and my life is, I can't, if I want a better life, I know that I have to leave drugs and alcohol behind, and I'm finally at a point where I want to do that, and so now the challenge has been trying to get into a detox, and it's kind of challenging, actually. I'm ready now, and it's like there's a waiting list on some places, and then Medi-Cal, some places don't take this, and so it's like, gosh. So I've been, the past couple of weeks, I've been trying to get into a detox, basically, so I hope I didn't glamorize that too much, but the main thing is that I've paid looking back at my life, there's times when I say, God, I wish I should have done something different, but I did what I did because I believed that I didn't have a choice. So of course I regret leaving New York and leaving school, but I left because that alcoholic voice was so loud that I didn't really believe that I had a choice. So it's kind of, that's what I was dealing with a lot of the times, and, if I had to do it over again, I'd do it differently, of course, because just for the sake of having a different experience, because the one that I chose was really, man, I'm tired. I'm really tired. And I know that anything that's coming up is not as nearly is going to be as tough as the path that I've carved out for myself has been brutal. So sobriety is really not that hard. I mean, it is. Showing up and being responsible is one of my biggest fears, but when you really break it down, it's so much simpler and joyous and gratifying compared to a life of drugs and alcohol. I mean, I mean, I just remember when I was making that decision, I was kind of excited, like, oh wow, I've got to, I get to go out and like find myself, and I was like, oh my God, that's what a oof, horrible. That's what it is. What it is.
All right, Billy, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Good luck with the detox.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.